Hi, I'm Rachel and I'm here to do my AM reading update for April 9th through 15th, 2018, insofar as I've accomplished anything. I guess I'm feeling pretty iffy this week because I'm starting with my obligatory haven't finished the book yet, and I'm not even halfway through this one. This is Station Identification, A Cultural History of Yiddish Radio in the United States by R.A. Kelman. I really do hope to finish it rather quickly sometime this week. I'm reading this as part of the Sammy Rohr Prize. For books that were in contention for the prize in 2010. I'm doing backlog lists of these books. The Sammy Rohr Prize is awarded annually to an emerging Jewish author in fiction or nonfiction, and 2010 is a nonfiction year. And this book has to do with Yiddish radio in the early and mid-century in the United States predominantly. It is pretty dry, and I was spending most of this weekend with my family and my 4-year-old niece in Baltimore, so that's my major excuse for not having as much brain power. This is a book that I have to read a little more slowly because of the tenure of the writing. A few things are sticking out to me so far. I've been thinking a lot about progressive American values of 100 years ago, which are different than how you might think of progressive American values now. Because in a book that I read last month called The Price of Whiteness, about how American Jews came to be considered white, we talked about the progressive movement and their aims to basically assimilate people into the melting pot. And that's indeed how they viewed radio too. It was supposed to be a way to Americanize people, and Yiddish was a strange little flux, I guess, because it spoke directly to a minority viewpoint in a minority language, as it were. But it does seem like, from the writing, it does seem like there's a little bit of not everything is completely 100% Yiddish, and they had to appeal to a broader audience than just Eastern European Jewish immigrants. And I really hope to get to more specifics. We've gotten to a couple specifics. I'm curious about the shows. We've gotten a couple. It's interesting that one early show was really just a hotel sort of doing marketing for itself. Like, they would put their band and their orchestra number and so forth on the air to show this is what you could get, you know, as your dinner entertainment staying at our hotel. I thought that was pretty fun. And then there were a lot of things like religious programming, which I don't think went over as well, particularly because you can't necessarily air anything on Jewish religious holidays because we're not supposed to be using the radio or things like that. And so then Yiddish programming was sort of the next big thing, and I don't know, it's hinted at drama, narrative, storylines, and we've been dropping some names of Yiddish writers and Yiddish performers. One of them that I kind of know off the top of my head is Molly Picon, because she became a bit more famous in the later years of the radio, because I'm still in the 1920s in my reading. So yeah, I don't know. You know, I wonder if this would have been so much fun to get this sort of information in a documentary where they'd have footage, hopefully, from the radio shows, and there's a lot of music in them sometimes, and that would have been a really more entertaining and perhaps easier way to get this information, but I'm going to keep plugging away at this. Because my next and final book that I'm reading for the 2010 Sammy Rohr Prize that I want to get to this week is Speaking of Jews, Rabbis, Intellectuals, and the Creation of an American Public Identity by Lila Berman. So I will read from the flap, or the back. Lila Corwin Berman asks why, over the course of the 20th century, American Jews became increasingly fascinated, even obsessed, with explaining themselves to their non-Jewish neighbors. What she discovers is that language itself became a crucial tool for Jewish group survival and integration into American life. Berman investigates a wide range of sources: radio and television broadcasts, best-selling books, sociological studies, debates about Jewish marriage and intermarriage, Jewish missionary work, and more, to reveal how rabbis, intellectuals, and others created a seemingly endless array of explanations about why Jews were indispensable to American life. Even as the content of these explanations developed and shifted over time, the very project of self-explanation would become a core element of Jewishness in the 20th century. So again, I kind of feel like these things are linked. The other nonfiction books about American Jewish life that I've read talk about self-identification, to go with the title of the last one, and why Jews want to be, how and why Jews want to be seen as they are in America. In the one about becoming white that I read last month, it was about wanting to reap the awards of American society while still maintaining some distinctiveness. And I would assume with the radio, that's sort of the same thing. It's about expressing yourself in these new American mediums, and I guess with this one too, it takes it to a more general level again about why Jews want to express themselves. And I don't know, my first response to why do Jews want to explain themselves to non-Jews is so that we don't disappear. It's sort of just about the fact that there's this progressive, from 100 years ago, progressive mentality of assimilation, and kind of the fight against it. But I'm putting a lot of my own feelings into this now, and I don't know exactly what she's going to find, but I hope it's really interesting, and I hope to say substantial things about these two books and the memoir that I read recently for the 2010 prize, because I'm hoping to make a video review of them and have it up by this weekend. High bars, self. High bars. Continuing with not being where I wanted to be with my reading. Well, last week I talked about reading through a collection of Emily Bronte's poetry for National Poetry Month, and, like, you know, doing it in little increments throughout the month, but I just didn't have the time, I guess, to get to it. So I thought, you know, next weekend I'll be at home and I'll have more time to myself, and I figured that I could try to read and finish the entire collection in more of a one-sitting sort of thing. I mean, that's an interesting way to imbibe poetry, isn't it? We'll have to see how it goes. But I do have a book to talk about that I haven't mentioned yet on this channel, but it is being mentioned a whole lot in the bookish world. It's called Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, and I listened to it on audiobook, and it is a YA fantasy story about a West African-inspired fantasy land called Orisha, where the evil king took away magic from magic practitioners and started to oppress these magi, these magic users. And there is a bit of colorism in this, that most of the magi were darker skinned, and the king and his non-magical people were lighter skinned. Anyway, we follow the children of one of the executed magi, and also the princess, who's sort of a rebellious princess who flips the bird to her dad, and they go on this quest to restore magic. And meanwhile, the princess's brother Inan is sent after them to apprehend them, but he has some conflicted feelings about his father's reign and about what magic is. And at the risk of being unpopular here for this humongously hyped up book, I liked it. I liked the book, but I didn't really love it. It didn't really sweep me away entirely. It was a very long book, and there were parts where the narrative lagged and my attention span kind of went awry. And a lot of the book is dedicated to a pretty standard fantasy quest journey that didn't really add anything all that new or exciting to the genre. I didn't necessarily think that... Well, I had, I guess, iffy feelings about all of the characters and how well developed I thought they were. I think that our main protagonist, Zelly, her anguish about her mother's death was incredibly well developed, and I really was intrigued by her relationship with her brother. But we had the obligatory YA romances, which were really ham-fisted, and there was a lot of flip-flopping on what you think about people rather quickly. And to a large degree, it was a rather simple story in terms of good versus evil, white hat versus black hat, which is something that doesn't really interest me. Adeyemi did give a little bit of pause to Inan, and he comes to have very complicated feelings about magic and about his father's reign. But I think a lot of that was told to us rather than shown to us. Well, it does seem like this will be turned into a movie, and this does seem like something that could work better in the movie form. You can sort of trim the fat of the long narration and focus more on the action and see the magic, too. And speaking of the magic system, at the very end, not to go deep into spoilers here, but the magic manifests in a way that I think was very unique and very evocative in the way that Adeyemi wrote it. So that was something, you know, if you're looking for something unique in this story, it is there. There's certainly something that you don't see in your standard fantasy novels. So yeah, I liked it. I might read the next novel, not sure. You know, there's a lot of stuff to read out there. Also, the narrator of the audiobook did some really incredible inflections of voices for her different characters and for her narrative voice, so, you know, that was pretty cool. Here's another book that I actually finished this week, huzzah! This is called The Hours Count by Jillian Cantor. It's a novel that I read in part for my Jewish book club that's meeting later this month, but I also read it for myself. It came on my radar when it was published, and I thought I'd add it to my Goodreads TBR because it has to do with the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg trial, and I felt like that was a part of history, Jewish history, that I didn't know as much about, so I thought, let's pay attention. So this is a novel that's told slant through the eyes of a fictional neighbor called Millie Stein, and it largely deals with her relationship with Ethel Rosenberg, because the two women happen to be young mothers cooped up at home a lot at the same time. And they even both have kind of problem children, as it were, because Cantor writes the Rosenberg oldest son as, I don't know, a little bit obstinate. I don't know how that maps to the actual man who is still living. Cantor had to give both of the Rosenberg sons different names, you know, for purposes of libel, I would assume. But Millie Stein's son is autistic. Not that they have the words for that in the 40s when this novel begins, and Millie chronicles the standard for the time, blame the women for the learning disabilities of the child, and, you know, her doctor would say, oh, why isn't he talking yet? You must just be a bad mother, you know, blah, blah, blah. And really, you know, this novel, I wouldn't even say is that much about the Rosenbergs. I mean, we go through their trial and their execution in the background, and there is certainly a lot about, well, the scare, the bomb scare in the Cold War about, oh my God, what if the Russians get the bomb and blow us to Kingdom Come, and a lot about spies and counter-spies and the witch hunts for communists, and how that can affect the Jews in Millie's life, because a lot of them are either Russian, like her husband is a Russian Jewish immigrant, and a lot of them also have ties, past or present, to the Communist Party. But I still feel like the main emotional crux of this novel is about how it feels to be this mother, to be so abandoned. I mean, Millie's husband is kind of an awful guy. I mean, he has, you know, political stuff going on, but he's awful because he's emotionally abusive, and she's living like in this sort of silent prison, as she comes to call it with another character. And Ethel Rosenberg turns out basically to be the friend that she desperately needs, and so in a way I think the issues that this novel really touches on more than any other is about the dangers of being isolated and the intimacy of having a peer even though another part of this novel is that Millie was written to be naive, and it was a way to skirt around issues of the Rosenbergs' complicity and things like that, because Millie doesn't know much and people don't really tell her much. But through the course of this novel, Ethel seems is certainly written as one of the more trustworthy people for in Millie's life, more trustworthy than any of the men she has contact with who are using her or want things or stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, there is a fast pace to this novel. What's going on? What can I solve when I'm left in the dark so much? But I felt like the emotional crux was about this relationship with Ethel Rosenberg, and indeed Jillian Cantor talked in this afterward about how she related to Ethel Rosenberg as a mother, and what it would be like to have to leave your children when they were so young. I like this novel. I mean, it's more plot-based than is my usual, although, you know, the plot is relatively fast-moving. There's a little bit too much drama, like conveniently piled on near the end, but, you know, okay, that's fine, I'll take it. I do think there'll be some interesting things to talk about with my book club, and hey, that's worth the price of admission. And finally, to circle back to something else I mentioned earlier in this video about hugely hyped books, this time in literary fiction. This is the next one on my list that I hope to get to this week. Bum, 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 bum. I'm not getting the melody of that right. But yes, this is The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer, which I got from the library earlier than I thought I would, but I'll take it, and I have to read it soon because there's a lot of people behind me who want it. Those of you who are not deeply ingrained in the literary fiction world and all of its hype, here's a description of what this novel is about. Greer Kredetsky is a college freshman when she meets the woman who will change her life. Faith Frank, dazzlingly persuasive and elegant at 63, has been a pillar of the women's movement for decades, a figure who inspires others. Hearing Faith speak for the first time in a crowded campus chapel, Greer feels her inner world light up. She and Corey, her high school boyfriend, have both been hardworking and ambitious, jokingly referred to as twin rocket ships, headed up and up and up. For so long, Greer has been full of longing, in search of a purpose she can't quite name. And then, astonishingly, Faith invites her to make something out of her new sense of awakening. Over time, Faith leads Greer along the most exciting and rewarding path of her life, as it winds forward and away from her meant-to-be love story with Corey, and the future she'd always imagined. As Corey's path, too, is altered in ways that feel beyond his control, both of them are asked to reckon with what they really want. What does it mean to be powerful? How do people measure their impact upon the world and upon one another? Does all of this look different for the men than it does for the women? With humor, wisdom, and profound intelligence, Meg Wolitzer weaves insights about power and influence, ego and loyalty, womanhood and ambition into a moving story that looks at the romantic ideals we pursue deep into adulthood. Ideals relating not just to whom we want to be with, but who we want to be. Well, it goes on, but I think I've sung this book's praises enough. I'm not sure exactly why the press for this book took off like a flame as it did. Maybe because the interestings that Wolitzer published a few years back made such a splash. Like a lot of other people, I read the interestings and loved it, and then, I'll be hipster about it, I went into reading all of Meg Wolitzer's backlist. In fact, I have 2 videos up on my BookTube channel where I have so far reviewed 6 of her backlist novels. And this summer, I intend to read her first 3 published novels and do my final review of those and put them up. And I'll link to that playlist of my Meg Wolitzer playlist down below. So I was really looking forward to this on its own. I'm just like, I love this author. I love how she writes female relationships and what it means to be a woman and female sexuality. And so I was just thrilled to see, you know, this title pop up. And then I think it was on Steve Donahue's channel where he mentioned just in passing, oh, everyone's going to be reading this book. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah. And I've certainly seen a couple of reviews on BookTube that I will really look forward to interacting with once I read this book, which will hopefully be very soon. I'm very excited. So that about covers it for me now. I have a relatively easy week coming up, just usual work stuff for the most part. I have some writing goals that I really want to get to, hopefully, but I also want to push myself with this nonfiction and get through it to make my Sammy Rohr video later this week, so here's to hoping. I also, in the morning, have to go ahead and mail off my taxes. As a reminder to my fellow Americans, it is time to get that stuff in order. Maybe some of you are rolling your eyes at me about how close I am to the deadline here, but hey, it is a Sunday after all, so I think I have even more leeway than usual, so huzzah! We'll see how this goes, and in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.